Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a representative from East New York, US representative. Very vocal. She's a very young, dynamic Democrat, and she seems to know how to use social media to great effect. Now, she's come out and said that she would consider, or she's open to nuclear as part of the green solution, which I think is big. And the other thing that happened at the same time was you had 10 cross-party or bipartisan senators also call for the extension to the Russian suspension agreement. So there's a lot of noise happening in nuclear, therefore uranium, this week in the US. So that's not going away. And the reason I say that is I think a lot of people were slightly disappointed with the Nuclear Fuel Working Group report. I think others latched onto it and said it was the next great thing. So it's definitely, there's a discussion going on. What's your take with regards to what's happening in the United States on the topic of nuclear at the moment?
First of all, with the bipartisan comments and call for not only the Russian suspension agreement to be extended or continued, but also to be enhanced and strengthened. I don't really see that as big news, from my perspective anyway. I thought that was a quite natural next step. It has made news because of its links with the Nuclear Fuel Working Group report that DOE released a few weeks ago. And when you look through the list of provocateurs there, you've got the usual suspects who've already been quite vocal. Lindsey Graham, Senator Barroso, etc., etc. I don't look at that list, for example, and say, "Oh my goodness, that person, that's interesting." On the other hand, AOC, her comments really are quite a watershed moment, I think, and that is big news that perhaps has been underreported or under-recognised. So if we take a step back, she has represented the vocal, radical left and has very demonstrably excluded nuclear from any consideration under the Green New Deal, with a fair bit of support from Bernie Sanders when he was still running at the time. And so the Green New Deal was seen as, because of that exclusion, was seen as a real threat to the nuclear industry and a threat to logic, really, and it's certainly a strong threat to the achievability of its objectives. How can you possibly exclude what still is by far the largest source of clean energy in the US and represents 22% of the grid? Now she's had reason to change that, and it'd be really interesting to know if Biden's influence there and having a more moderating influence has played a role in that. And her comments itself, for anyone out there, they should go to it directly. Not only did she say that the door is open to nuclear, but she also emphasised that it is a critical part of the discussion, which is about as close as you can get to a backflip there in terms of her policy. And emphasising, I think, 3 times in her comments that the door remains open. That's, for my read, very much about allowing nuclear to come back into that conversation and start the new Green Deal. And there's been a number of lobbyists and even community groups and employee groups from nuclear reactors who've proposed an alternative Green Deal that just has a bit more reality and allows nuclear to play its role. So for me, that's important. It's important because it's moderating the Democratic position as they start to get closer to the election. It means that one of the most attractive, if we can put it that way, like the most appealing is perhaps the better way of saying it, one of the most appealing voices on that far left end of the Democrat Party is now relatively aligned with the moderate view that Biden's got towards nuclear. But it also goes to the capturing, I think, a realistic perspective from the younger generation when it comes to looking at what nuclear can do. What we typically see is a progression along many lifetimes where people start somewhat radically socialist, and they go through university and they wave flags and they do all of that sort of stuff, and they tie-dye their shirts and whatever else it was that you and I did when we were there. And then as reality sets in life and they realise the hard grind of raising a family and paying bills, they sort of move more moderate and potentially out to the right. So this is good for assisting the part of the constituency who are still going through that experiment with liberal socialist ideals and had made those ideals synonymous with anti-nuclear. Because the other thing to bear in mind is that subsection of society, they haven't grown up with the fear of the bomb. And when you talk to many young people, and the stats bear this out in terms of when they segmentise the surveys about support for nuclear power, in many cases it's a reliance on things that Greta Thunberg's saying or AOC is saying, and just wanting to fall into line with the cult or with the movement, if I can put it that way. So this is important, and it's important for shifting the generalised voter base in favour of nuclear power. And going into the election in November, it's moves like these that will create a really strong, positive foundation for nuclear in the struggling US market, regardless of who gets in.